Yeah. Yeah. Do you have audio in the room?
Okay, everyone, I'd like you to just have as additional people come back. Just make sure you know that Brooke Nova's group did two things. One, we showed up on time and we had the most fun. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the most fun and showed up on time. I mean, like, pretty much. We're all good.
Friends online, can everyone hear me okay?
Great job. Thank you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Just working on trying to figure out how to do it all. I know Kelly's covered a few things over there that I.
Yeah.
Because I got this guy.
Well, do you need anything?
I think so. I think unless I get to the right. And then maybe I'll have you.
Well, just smaller.
Well, the thing about.
Not my first meeting. Yes.
I didn't get one. Was it from before?
It was from Kazaki.
I'm still gonna steal it. I wanted the. Yeah, thank you.
All right, welcome and welcome back. That was amazing. Those on the phone,
all the
just
way
had a,
Reserve
review and then a tour of the school, just different parts of the program here, and it is frankly mind-blowing, incredibly inspiring. It brings a lot of hope for our future, so thank you for your leadership and for making this available to today, to all the staff and students that make that.
Our pleasure, thank you.
All right, so, we have got a very full agenda, you've heard me say it before and say it again. We're gonna stick to our timelines, or else we're not gonna get through everything, because we do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock today, so. Please be mindful if you are one of the speakers to, stay within your allotted time, so we can get through our very robust agenda. It's a good agenda, thank you, Todd and team for putting it together. So welcome. Happy holidays, and a couple of things just to highlight that we will be going through today. We'll do our usual housekeeping things. Big highlight, we'll be going through the continuous improvement, accountability assessment. And then following that, we will be looking for a vote to approve that. We then spent some time talking about federal performance measures for per capita with us today. And then Craig, Pope, and Andrew Dyke are going to take us through the workforce study. And then we'll wrap up with future ready employer focus groups and then other business. Any questions before we get started? Okay, let's do it. All right. So what do you want to highlight as part of the continuous improvement, since we're going to be talking about the continuous improvement assessment today? Our agenda, you may have noticed, looks different, and that's because of continuous improvement. And what's super cool about us coming to public, oh, I really like this agenda, like it just feels really accessible and easy to read. And actually that's why it was created this way. The format was developed by Oregon Serves, the staff of Oregon Serves and Office of Workforce Investments with GEIA in mind. So for example, for a cycle period individual, they can utilize their screen readers and understand the agenda much more efficiently and effectively using formatting, which I think is really awesome. Thank you for that. All right, got 2 new members. First up is Rama Nav Rondi. Where'd you go? There you are. You want to say hello?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Ramana. I'm the president and CEO of the company in Southgate here in Beaverton. I've been living in Beaverton area for almost 25 years. During my 20+ years of experience, I worked with the company, private and non-profit organizations. I'm looking forward to technology.
Your door is so wet.
Business management, after consulting, remote team development, also building and delivering health IT solutions.
Welcome. Guys, happy here. And next is our Sarula. Sarah. Polly Law. And
Hey, girl.
you have to mute your phone, please, or your screen, if you're remote. And she has a couple of things she can be sharing with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go faster. So my name is Sarla Paliwal, and I'm an electrical engineer and computer scientist by training. I retired from Mentor Graphics, which was acquired by Siemens at the end of last year. And before that, I used to work for IBM on the East Coast. So I wanted to share 3 or 4 data points with you on my motivation to join the Workforce Talent Development Board, because I'm hoping to find believers and collaborators in this group here, right? So the first thing that I wanted to say, this is something all of you who are in corporate America are probably aware of this. It's called the pyramid or the broken, actually it's the broken wrong effect in the ladder, where it basically says you have a certain number, talks about gender diversity here, which represents, I think, all kind of under, minorities, that you hire a certain percentage of, say, women. And then by the time you go up, that percentage goes down greatly. You can just put that in. If you look at tech, the numbers are much worse. So when you start off, you're kind of like about 15 to 20%. And by the time you get up there, it's 1%. And so corporations, they're doing quite a few things and lots of, nurturing and mentoring and things like that. But one of the things that we're seeing is that we don't have a good pipeline, whether it's gender diversity or other kind of underrepresentation. So that's the area that I want to talk about and also show some more data points to you to hopefully make you the believers. Go to the next slide. This looks pretty. So this sort of shows, or in the Society of Women Engineers, the number of women hired in 2022 in the different fields. I'm just going to hone in on one, but except for environmental engineers, you see 9% of electrical engineers. This is kind of like the numbers that I went to school, right? Long, long ago. And so we look at computer hardware, 13, 18 computer programmers, a little bit more software quality. These numbers below are the numbers from India, right? So you see 27% electrical engineers, 41% electronics engineers, because there we split it out, and computer engineers 38.1. You see the same kind of numbers. I know by personal experience in countries like Egypt, Armenia, China, but not in Europe or the United States. So it can be done. It's not happening. Right? So this is the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, and they come up with a clever title. It says Short-Circuited Electrical Engineering Degrees in the United States. And essentially what they're saying is that we are not producing enough electrical engineers. And so electrical engineers rose just 37.5%, while others rose 81. And then in the third bullet, it's really talking about the comparison between US citizens and non-US citizens. So that means what's the pipeline coming from our high schools that are then going to electrical engineering. So essentially it's like policymakers should do something about this. Yes, we are advisors, policymakers. And my last slide is something that you all are probably really aware of, and I call it an opportunity because I don't want to just talk about the CHIPS and Science Act, but you all know Oregon has received funds for the CHIPS and Science Act. There are $280 billion. Look at the number of people it employs, all kinds of engineers. But what the Silicon Industry Association says that, out of the 115,000 jobs that predict by 2030, half of them at least are not going to be filled because we don't have enough skills. And now on top of that, where you layer the representation or the underrepresentation we have a lot of work to do. So that's my last slide. And I know, I've been talking to Venkat and Todd and Skip Newberry and Deb Mumhill about really honing in on this and, creating, I think K-12 is so important. And I was here actually earlier this year. Travis had invited me as part of the industry advisory committee. So that's like a story, and hopefully we can discuss this one. Thank you.
For that, but do we have quorum?
We not have a quorum.
Okay. Last, what we already just, five. All right, sure. And that's assuming everyone signed in.
So I think, including anybody online.
Okay, I'll come back to you and. All right, so I want to remind us all, to keep into the agenda, just about our agreements, and if we could bring those up. So Paul, a while back, Sherry led a body of work with us about how do we think about our work and how do we enter into these meetings each time. And so we came up with this great acronym, WTDB, to represent. So just as a reminder, W, it stands for working collaboratively. T is transparency and trust. D is data-driven decision-making. And B, bold and innovative. And I've seen of late in the last few meetings that we've had, really this group kind of maturing into our agreements, and just want to encourage us to keep going on that journey. Next up is So next up, I want to, every year in December, one of my favorite parts of the December meeting is we award what we call the Driving Force Awards. So people that have done some really extraordinary work this year that we want to highlight. So first, up, we have 2 awards to give. It's Charlie. For his outstanding leadership, vision, and passion, commitment to the workforce and talent development system in Oregon, particularly employability skills. I saw it on display downstairs and asked so many great questions about employability skills. So congratulations, Charlie. Thank you. Then second is Ben. Yes, you, for your leadership, vision, and passion commitment to workforce and talent development system in Oregon, particularly with AI and tech, all that you've done with technology consortium and as chair of the STEM Investment Council. So congratulations. We will have those awards. We'll give them to you later, so you don't have to pick them out in the rain and stuff. See them first. All right, Aaliyah, do we have any public comment?
We do. We have 2 people who would like to comment. First, we have Brent Kell.
Okay. No, I think Brent's speaking later, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
And then how about Tom Goodhue?
Tom excused himself, he had to get something else.
Okay.
Then we don't have public comment.
All right, and then still, we're not a quorum did we make it?
Checking.
One more. Okay, we'll come back. Just let me know. And one thing we have 2 things we need to do today. One is approve the minutes to agree from last time. And second is to approve the cake assessment. So hopefully we can get ourselves to quorum. We are. No. You're agreeing with me that it's all. Okay. All right. Okay, so next up is we are going to move into this topic of continuous improvement, accountability, and work, and 2024 WSO assessment. So just a little bit of context. So as you know, there's a committee that a subset of this group that was formed under Senate Bill 6023 in 2021. And the subcommittee of the WTDs requires us, in consultation with the state workforce agencies and local development boards, to formally assess the effectiveness of the overall public workforce system or workforce support. The legislature requires to send this assessment with recommendations for improvements to the governor and interim committees of the Legislative Assembly related to workforce by November 15th. So we are right there. In terms of needing to get this in every even number of years. So that's why we're doing it now. So with that, I'm going to send it over to Kaylin, one of our co-chairs, to take us through.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kaylin Lane. This is Chris Latimer. We are the chairs for the Continuous Improvement Committee. Really happy to be here with you this afternoon. Before we dive into today's agenda, welcome and thank each of you for your dedication and leadership. Your unwavering commitment to advancing a shared vision, a workforce system that drives real, meaningful outcomes for Oregon communities has brought us to this pivotal moment. While progress has been made, we must acknowledge that challenges remain in achieving the large-scale transformation our workforce system truly needs. Today's discussion is an opportunity to align our efforts, focus our energy, and take bold steps toward the future together we envision. Today, with fellow PIC members and our friends from Coragio, we will review key themes and insights from the assessment. It is not just an assessment. This report is not just an assessment of where we stand, but a call to action. A blueprint for the transformative steps necessary to unlock WorkSource Oregon's full potential. The report highlights 3 critical truths. Incremental improvements have been made. System-wide transformation is still urgently needed. A strategic shift is essential,
to achieving long-term sustainable change. The report outlines bold recommendations for action, and we hope you will consider recommending approval today. Establishing a governor mandate to prioritize workforce system transformation, strengthening alignment between state and local workforce boards to enhance coordination and impact, creating unified reporting metrics to improve transparency and accountability, and exploring changes to the WIOA program and funding framework to better serve Oregon's evolving workforce. This is a pivotal moment, not just for this committee, but for every Oregonian who depends on us to create a workforce system that is equitable, innovative, and impactful. With strong leadership and strategic alignment, today we have a chance to set a new standard, one that empowers job seekers, strengthens businesses, and builds resilient communities across the state. Thank you for your dedication to this important work. Let's dive into today's agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Susan Karofsky. I'm with Coragio Group. Thank you so much for inviting us to share more about the KICS 2024 assessment. I'm joined by my colleague Jen Gray O'Connor. She's going to come up in a little bit with other members of the KIC. We're going to take you in more detail around some of the recommendations. We go to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. I just want to thank the KIC, who has walked step by step in partnership with Coragio Group in helping develop the assessment that hopefully you've all had a chance to read and review that we received in advance of the meeting. You can kind of see here kind of the high level activities of the work that we've been doing since July to get to this point to share the assessment with you, and I hope that you will feel comfortable approving it and sending it along to the governor. Couple of things that I just want to highlight about this. The KIC was very engaged and involved in helping us determine the approach we would take for the assessment. Looking at the work that had been done from the previous two assessments, determining what type of outreach was needed and the approach, and then synthesizing the insights. They also rolled up their sleeves and had some great work sessions and talked about some difficult things about the level of recommendations and changes required to drive systems change throughout the workforce system. So I just want to thank the KIC for their partnership in this. They've been wonderful to work with and have been really true partners in solution in getting to this point. Next slide, please. Foundational to this assessment, the KIC follows a lean continuous improvement approach. And if you're familiar with that concept, they follow the plan, do, check, act cycle. The initial assessment and the governance assessment were planning. In between those assessments, they went and did things. And then this assessment was coming back to check in line with Senate Bill 623. How did they do? So the fundamental questions that were asked were, what was the improvement? What data is there to determine if the improvement's working? What does the data indicate? And then how do we want to act moving forward? Next slide, please. Part of our work was to outreach to partner organizations and do some additional state benchmarking. You can see the list here of the partner organizations that either had individual interviews or were part of focus groups. And in addition to the states that were pulled from to benchmark. These states were selected because in the 2022 KIC governance assessment, they did some initial benchmarking with states, wanted to go back to those states and learn a little bit more about some key things that they were able to identify out of that initial governance assessment. Next slide, please. And so some quick numbers and topics of both benchmarking interviews and interviews done with other partner organizations. And the topics. You can kind of see for the individual interviews, there's a lot of then checking on the initial assessment and the governance assessment and the recommendations that have been put forward by the KIC in the past. The benchmarking topics, some of it overlapped with the governance assessment, some of them were deeper topics to help understand a little bit more, like the role of the governor and the legislature in their involvement in state systems and some of those other benchmark state organizations. Next slide, please.
I'm not gonna read through all this because it's in your, the KICS, assessment report, but I wanted to highlight just a couple of things that were learned from the state benchmark. States with centralized workforce systems had an easier time relying on data and performance metrics. But one of the things that we had heard in the governance assessment, heard it again in this go back for the additional benchmark. We also learned and heard again that states with strong executive and legislative support are really help their systems gain efficiency and effectiveness in delivering services to their customers. The Workforce Oregon system customers being the job seekers and employers. Next slide, please. So just kind of the high level themes from the assessment. Some improvements have been made within the system. So some progress has been made. And as you look at the detail of each of the previous recommendations and what we learned, you can see that progress is happening. But the system continues to struggle to really make the large scale system improvements happen. So the Continuous Improvement Committee, part of this assessment, really agreed that some strategic shifts needed to happen to drive greater systems change across the workforce system. Next slide, please. Part of the KICS process was to really use a set of decision-making criteria. There are a lot of things that the KICS could have put forward in this report to recommend to the governor. We partnered with the KIC to help them go through a set of decision-making considerations to determine what are really the key things that they felt were the biggest change levers to drive more transformative systems change. I'm not going to read all of these, but you can just kind of see here some of the decision-making criteria that they considered. Number 3, it's quick win or easy lift and create momentum. Is it in flight? So these were the things that they, as they were in their workshops, determining what recommendations do we want to put forward. These were the considerations that they used to help determine what made it into the final report. Next slide, please. We also talked with the KIC around the level of change associated with driving systems change. And there were across this continuum of incremental change, more transformational change, and more disruptive change. The KIC, part of their decision-making process and conversations were, what level of change do we want? What are our levers? And what are our proposed recommendations? And they had some very robust dialogue and discussion around this continuum and what level of change they really wanted to put forward to the government. Next slide, please. So these are the 4 recommended recommendations. You have them in your assessment. Members of the KIC are going to go through them in more detail. I just also want to share that in the appendix of your report, if you haven't gotten to that part of it, are detailed action plans. The action plans really take these recommendations and break down the process steps that are needed to start to get further clarity on what these recommendations might look like, what the work looks like, and were designed in partnership with members of the Continuous Improvement Committee, local workforce boards, and associated state agencies. So if you had a chance to review the detailed action plans in the appendix, I hope you saw that that partnership approach between the KIC and other members of the system was really taken into consideration as they detailed their action plans. I think I've got one more slide before I hand it over. One of the last things the KIC talked about was knowing that they're asking to make some strategic shifts in the system. They had good dialogue and discussion around where does our role need to shift. So they had some time really thinking about, we have operated in a certain way since 2021. How do we want to operate differently to really be able to drive this level of systems change? So some of the key things that, they talk about how they work together, what they discuss when they're together, how they learn together, and how they see their role evolving. The WTDB, the KIC is hoping for more engagement with you all. So I just want to highlight that one thing that came out of their conversation of how they see their role shifting in support of greater systems change. I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, Jen. I'll be back to facilitate a discussion. Jen is going to, and other members of the KIC are going to take you through more detail of the recommendation.
Great, thank you, Susan. Let me do a quick check with our KIC speakers. Would you like to come up and sit right here? Would you prefer just to speak where you're sitting? What works best for your comfort? Okay, I hear one vote for just saying what you're saying. Does that work for others? Okay, great. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of framing and then I'm gonna pass the baton over to hear from our PIC members. You're gonna hear about these top 4 recommendations and hopefully, again, you've had an opportunity to look at the report. You know that behind each of the recommendations is a pretty well thought out action plan that each subcommittee has been working on. Just to frame up how we're going to do this, the way that they will present this information is really by centering on why is this recommendation important? And then what might we need from you as the WTDB in order to help make this happen? I will ask them, if you don't mind going to the next slide. We're going to have some discussion questions, but we're going to ask you to save any clarifying questions or any comments until the end of the presentation. The thinking behind that is just, there might be something that comes up in one that actually gets answered in a later recommendation because we're really viewing these recommendations as interlocking ways of creating transformational change. But just to preview what we're really looking for in this discussion is, again, anything that you need to be clear on, any comments you have, but what we really want to know is, why do you see these recommendations as important? Are there other contexts or work in progress that might be relevant to this, to these recommendations? And again, focusing on your role, how would these recommendations, how could you be partners with KIC in really activating and making this happen? And then finally, we do want to discuss, are there any risks that you see? Are there any dependencies, anything that we would want to ensure that we're carefully considering as it goes into the implementation of these recommendations? And so with that said, I want to pass it to Chris to walk us through this first recommendation. Actually, I lied. I can't sit here. Okay. You go to the next thing. I am disruptive. And Tom is disruptive. Oscar. So not everybody knows me and knows my background. Some of you do, but I spent, I've been how many years? 23 years in the seat in the workforce development system. 7 of those years doing what Kim and Andrew do as a workforce board director, running programs in 24 rural counties in Oregon. And I left that system because I was frustrated with that system. I was tired of pushing boulders with my nose and not making any difference. And I did nonprofit for 10 years, and now I'm corporate. And I'm working with a great company who gives me the opportunity to step into things I care about. And this is something that I care about. And so the reason I wanted to actually stand up was because there are 2 things on this slide. Well, the recommendations I've written. You can read it, but I'm going to read it. Create greater alignment between the state workforce board, local workforce boards, state agency workforce programs, and define related authority roles and responsibilities. It's time. There's a couple. Why is this important? There's a couple bullets under why this is important that really rang true to me when they asked me to present this recommendation. And one of those, improve communication with the government. If our system is not having an open line of communication with the government about what we see happening, what we all who are here being paid by our companies to represent our companies and other employers in the state of Oregon, what we see happening, there's nobody listening in Salem. We're never going to make change happen at the local level, right? At least that's how I empower the Workforce Talent Development Board to do something. I, for one, am not interested in sitting at this table, approving of spending hours and hours over the last 3 months, and I spent the least amount of hours just because of my schedule, but spending hours looking at this stuff, reading recommendations, wordsmithing, to hand it off to somebody, have it go to Salem, and nobody listens to it. There's no conversation about it, and I have no authority to do anything about it. So I think empowering the Workforce Talent Development Board is very, very important. I also think at this point, really aligning all of our systems. Let's all row in the same direction instead of going all on these different branches off of this river for once. Let's get there, row the same direction, get in the current, and go. From my desk,
running training and development for our company. When I sat down on the private side and I started trying to navigate the workforce system, I knew my side of the system. I knew Kim, I knew to call Andrew, who to call all over the state as far as WIA or WOIA, goes. But then the rest of the system is just like, it's crazy out there. You know, I have resources to serve hundreds of people just even in my center here in Oregon. And I can't figure out who to talk to, how to connect with people, and I don't have time for that. And you guys have the same issues. So really, that's all I have to say about this recommendation. You've seen my passion for it, why it's important to me. Let's get alignment, let's get conversations open, and let's give the workforce health development board's authority to actually do something. So that's my recommendation.
If we want to go to the next recommendation, I would love to pass it off to Ian to hear about consolidating system-wide performance.
So, I feel like Travis did a good job of kicking this one off earlier, when he talked about how important metrics are and goals, et cetera. And really, this is what this is all about. It's unifying and consolidating reporting on system-wide performance metrics. So that rather than every different part of the system has different metrics and goals, et cetera, what we're proposing here is that we have clear metrics across the system that we're all working toward. I think at the end of the day, if you sort of ask people, you know, oh, why or what are you doing? It all kind of comes together, but this is really crystallizing and saying we're all accountable to the same sort of top line metrics that we would really like to drive, see that work driven. And so why is that important? It ensures that we're accountable, we're aligned, we're not wasting resources, and we're all moving together in the same direction. The assessment goal was to determine if we had system-wide performance measures, and the outcomes from that were that the assessment confirmed that we had some progress that had been made on identifying and implementing system-wide performance measures, but we've not gone far enough. And they weren't able to identify any incentives in place or their effectiveness in improving the system at the local level. And I think for those of us that have worked in environments where you have shared goals and outcomes, it's so much more fun and so much more collaborative when you're able to sort of point to that. So this is really just about making sure that we share across the whole system, and we would like to see this work driven, and are inviting you into agreeing to that. So what do we need from the WTDB? We would act as the overall sponsor, so we would be looking for people to help be participative in that work. We would understand that we will need change leadership to drive this, because this will represent a shift. And we want to make sure that people are unifying around this. We will seek input from across all the different key stakeholders for different perspectives on how to think about this. And then determine and communicate our metrics and approach how we'll report and review on those. So I love this one. I think it's really important, and I think that it fits really nicely with what Chris just talked about, as well as really supporting and being able to report back to the governor all the good work across the system that we're doing. Questions at the end, unless you want to say, unless you're going to say the data thing. I'm going to say something about the data. Do it, because you know I like that. That's part of my job. I love this, and I would even advocate for requiring meeting and like indicators. I'm going to give otherwise 110%. I don't know you're not on track for performance metrics. Yeah, 100%, 110%. Okay. Welcome.
Wonderful. And then next we'll hear from Fred.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here, and thanks for serving on this committee. It's been a project that's been a needed project. Many of us here look at workforce development in a bunch of different lenses. My day job is I'm CEO of Valley Immediate Care, urgent care practices in Southern Oregon. And so I see our employees go through the program. We have a very developed career pathways program, partnering with K-12 and secondary education. I also serve our local workforce investment board, Workforce Partnership. served there for about 12 years. I'm currently board chair of that board. I'm also an instructor, an X-ray instructor, and I teach civic healthcare training. So I see how those funds get down to the training provider, how they put to use. So really have a passion about healthcare workforce and workforce development here. So my topic is kind of exploring reorganizing the state WIOA funds and how they're spent. WIOA, as most of you know, is a pretty complicated funding source. I think there's 13 or 14 different buckets of money for different priority populations, but that is distributed within the state by, I think, 5 different state agencies, which makes it a super complex. So we're starting out with a very complex bill to begin with. We just made it 5 times more complex. And so we really need, I think, to streamline some synergy between funding sources, better leverage of funding, and about, well, I don't know, a whole percentage, but the majority of funding from WIOA does not go to training programs. It goes in administrative waste, basically. And so we need to streamline it down, get that to a point where most of those dollars go into training programs and benefit our employees and benefit our kids. So, and we're going to need to still be very disruptive. So that's why it's really important we have the governor's support in this. Without the governor's support, we're going to, like somebody said, if we push the boulder uphill with your nose, and without governor's support. So, thank you.
So I'm going to speak just to this last one and then open it up and let our members also comment. So Chris did a beautiful job of setting this up, that all of these recommendations are really predicated on getting support from the government. And so this last recommendation is that we really continue to advocate and enlist the governor's support in carrying out all of these recommendations, really getting that acknowledgement that widespread system change is necessary. As you can see, we know that there are inefficiencies. Each of these recommendations speak to that. We know that there's a lot of unnecessary complexity. And we really believe that one of the key levers of success is going to be in getting support from the governor and from the legislatures. So one of the things that we would need from the WTDB is that agreement of yes, we think these are the right recommendations, and we are in full support in helping outline a path for PIC members to really be able to enlist that support from the government. Let me take a step back and see anything our PIC members would add, since this is kind of our dependency for many of the other recommendations. Great. Okay, so now you see at a very high level the recommendations. So this is an opportunity. I'll pass over to Susan for us to have a little bit of discussion around the report.
Jen, and thanks, big thanks to all the KIC members for sharing their hard work in developing the recommendations. So we put out some, if you can go to the next slide, please, thank you. We put out some prompting questions at the beginning, but if you have other questions, thoughts, comments, this is the time for dialogue and discussion. And I just want to check the time because we have until we are ahead of schedule. Just so you know, from where we had thought we would be on the agenda. So we have a good amount of time for some dialogue and discussion. This is important in which all of you feel comfortable. Hopefully you have a quorum. Hopefully you can vote on the approval of the recommendation. So now is the time for you as WTDB to either, we can talk about these questions, or if you have other questions, happy to answer, field those next. Who wants to get us started? Yes.
I have a question, and it's just what prompted it is that I used to work in Michigan, and I don't know differences in the systems. And then one slide mentioned how they talk about decentralized versus centralized, work systems. In the recommendation on system structure, where it says to create greater alignment between state workforce boards, does that work entail looking at or diving deeper into whether or not, or in what way the state can take a more centralized approach to lessen the local governing workforce? Or what does that mean? What does that greater alignment mean? Or it's just to get us started towards exploring what greater alignment could look like?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll go ahead and answer based on my understanding of the KIC members that developed the action plan associated with that recommendation, but I would invite the KIC members to jump in. I think the first step where the KIC felt they needed to start to create greater alignment is really understanding the roles and responsibilities between the the state workforce board, local workforce board, state agencies, because when we were conducting our partner outreach, it was clear that there was still a lack of clarity about the various roles and how all those roles really work together in service of the system. Now, I could anticipate that after that role and responsibility clarification happens, that there might be some refinements to, how state agencies work together. But the first step that the sub-teams that developed the action plans felt was needed was really driving that clarity about what's the current state and how does it look today. Let me stop there. Am I answering your question?
You're answering the question and highlighting, because for me, still, there's still for me, the future of how systems are connected and,
Yeah.
and the differences. So that might, you answered the question.
Let me invite other KIC members, if there's anyone else that was either serving on that subcommittee or has something they'd like to add to my response, I welcome that.
The third question is about the risk to the implementing recommendations. What's stopping us? How did those obstacles come up in your conversations?
That is a really, really great question. I can share what I've heard.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Start there. The one obstacle was, I think, a sense of not really understanding who has decision-making authority. That's a pretty big obstacle, right? Because if you're trying to drive systems change, you really need to know when you're putting a recommendation forward, who's empowered to say yes or no, and then who is going to hold the system accountable to achieving that. And that was not true. There was also some sense that there may not be support from the governor's office to drive broader or more transformative system level change. And so when you think about implied or explicit, there could be confusion around, can we do this if there isn't an explicit direction from the governor around who are empowered to drive this system level change. Those are two that come off the top of my head from what I've heard, but I'd invite others, because I know we've had a lot of conversations about potential barriers. If there's others that, other things that others would like to
Just
share.
a quick follow-up. Could you give us the headlines of ideas you got from conversations about how to answer those two objections, or are they discussed in the report? Perhaps I missed them.
Yeah, so I think the understanding the roles of the players in the systems is pretty foundational, right? Because if you understand the roles, then you know who's empowered to make decisions, right? And I think there's some confusion around, is the WTDB empowered right now? And how does their authority align with the local workforce boards and their authorities, which, Andrew, what's the bill number or the OR number for local authority? 1308, thank you. So, I mean, I think there's still, that needs to be clarified. That's why that came up as one of the foundational recommendations is, once you get that clarified, then hopefully that barrier is removed and the system can start to move. I want to get to your question in 1 second. I want to invite other KIC members that might want to augment or add or enhance what I've shared.
Come on. Yeah.
I have a question over there first, and then I'll come to you, if that's okay?
You could give an example of how this disconnect between the state and the local level was manifesting. An example of what.
I can give a very practical example of, if that's helpful. When we were speaking with local workforce board leaders, and we were kind of talking about, the level of improvements that they've been able to enact since the last assessment. And there was a sense of they weren't sure if they could, they felt, I think, empowered to act at their local level, but how can they spread the scale, right, across the system? So there was in that this just a very practical example. In that conversation, there was a sense of, we're frustrated. We want the system to move. Either we aren't authorized by whoever, the governor, state local workforce board to move this. Is that a helpful practical example?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for asking the question. I'm sorry, sir. Thank you
No,
for
it's
being
fine.
patient.
I just wanted to actually go back to the previous, because Todd, as I remember in our conversations, to go way back, how did Oregon's workforce system evolve in the first place? How did we end up under tech oversight? So what I wanted to find out is, so do we know, is that the same optimization structure that we would need to go through? Should we wish to have greater employees, either with the governor's office or the legislature? Or do we even know that? Is that part of that? We don't know who provides.
I think that's part of it. I'll defer to you, and you can share what you heard on the ground from people. But yeah, I think that's part of it, Charlie. I think the question of how that is all structured, currently, well, even to your point, historically, currently, and future forward, is a conversation I think that should happen. I'm curious as to, what did you hear?
Yeah, I think that, the reason the recommendation on clarifying roles and responsibilities is a pretty critical one is because I think some believe the HEC had authority today. Some believe the HEC does not have the authority today, right? And so, when you think about the ability for whoever to be a decision maker in the system, if you have some members of the system that believe the HEC currently within how it's been designed has that authority under the HEC, right? Some believe you may need to move it out of the HEC in order to get greater authority, and some believe no, that authority should stay with the local workforce boards. So I don't know if the root cause is where the HEC sits. I think the root cause might be more just clarifying who has the decision-making authority. Does that help answer?
The WTDP.
Oh, can I say that?
I need the WTDP.
I don't get my acronyms messed up in my head.
One thing to understand is WIOA does require the system we have, right?
Right.
So we know that because with the states, and we've been to state conferences where we've seen boards organized in vastly different ways, right? Some boards have a lot of authority, some boards are in our purse, some boards do advocacy and lobbying. It really comes down to what an individual state wants to do. There's no inherent stumbling block within WIOA that would prevent really anything.
Yeah.
I mean, some things, but it really has been a historical placement in the state that has connected education and workforce, in particular in the state of Oregon, that have put us kind of here, and that's just a historical default. I don't, not get to go all the way back in time to the people who first, put things together. But I think what you outlined, those three camps, is exactly right. So that's the trick.
And I think we have a comment right here, David, then we'll go to you, and then Charlie will circle back, make sure you got a question.
I started to understand better about the workforce system when we were pursuing the apprenticeship program. And so I have two comments on this. One is the metrics thing. So Andrew's our workforce board guy, Dr. Bennings is our community college, and I run the school district. Just for like, say, the dental assistant program you saw downstairs. It's knowable how many dental assistants we need in the next decade. It's knowable which programs cultivate those talents through our youth and through the community college and through a university, whatever. And we know how many kids are in the system or adults. There's no one who's holding me accountable for producing X number of up and coming dental assistants. And we should know, Dr. Bennings and I should be working on how many are coming through and then how many are going to matriculate to you. And then how many are we going to have in 10 years? And that's the high level metrics that I would be a huge fan of, because I should be held accountable because I'm in charge of taxpayer dollars and little kids to figure out how that system works. And so I'm a huge favor of that. I'd love to be a part of it. The other thing, Charlie, that I learned when we were trying to work through BOLI and through the HEC and ODE, the Oregon Department of Education and Universities, was that we don't have one org chart, we have two. There's the governor's side, which is the HEC, and the workforce boards and education systems. And then we have the Bureau of Labor and Industry, which is regulatory in nature, but is being asked to proliferate the number of apprenticeships that we have. And there, I think we're asking, well, I know that in Oregon, I believe we're one of two states that have a democratically elected Secretary of Labor. And in other states, there's more of a single organizational chart. I built a slide for myself after interviewing all of you about what's happening here. And there's two charts. And so I had to start to work through ODE to figure out what regulation I was violating to let kids work in manufacturing. And then I had to go to Boley and register my apprenticeship and hear all about the child labor laws I'm going to violate. And I'm pulling on strings from two separate entities that don't really work together. And all the industry folks, by the way, are scared of Boley because they are regulatory. And so I'm saying this because I'd love to be involved in this work, because I think structurally in Oregon, we have to negotiate at least liaisons between these things. Like I'd love to have the HEC ODE provide a liaison to Boley so that public schools can work more easily with Boley. We just don't, we go it alone and we try to go up that chart. So that I would just throw those on an organizational chart examination. We're building one. Mine's real ugly and confusing, but I would offer it as a sample of what I think we need to analyze in order to figure out where the lack of alignment is.
And I think what I heard, so I participated in a few of the meetings, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in ahead of people, but I just want to add to what Travis just said. In some of the breakup groups, I think what my observation was, is that we're at a point in time in our history where what was, and maybe it was good or maybe it wasn't good or could have been better or what have you. But then I think for the most part, we got to have transformational change, not to be, use the word disruptive, but not to be in the negative sense, like somebody's doing something wrong. It's just that structurally or for whatever reason, the way we operate today isn't going to get us to tomorrow. And so the whole point of what we're proposing this group is let's seize tomorrow and transform our system so that we can really get out of what the needs of our citizens are. We just don't think we can stay the way we are. And there's so many good people all across the system that we've got to find a way to harness all of this and operate in a way so that you're not making, 3 different project plans to do one thing. That it's much more streamlined and we get out of stuff. Just no time to wait. The urgency of what's needed in order to build jobs and make sure that we prosper in our state is now. That's my thoughts.
I know David has been patient. Charlie, I just want to make sure that we've gotten your question answered. Do you feel?
Well, kind of, again, what it gets to is a very simple question. Who's the, in other words, if you want to change, who do we have to satisfy to do, I'm all for the disruptive change. I'm all for bettering our system and design and so forth. If we use titles like, well, we need to give this to the state to figure out. But who is the state? And so I hear that in a lot of our language of alignment and so forth, and even at the local level, we say, well, we've got to talk to the county. Who is the county? Who is the decision maker? And I think, Sherry, you pointed out that a piece that I think is accurate. I don't think there's a mandate to go, we have a certain structure, and you have all been privy to amazingly different structures in the national government. But to have this agenda advance, it feels like the number one priority is determining who the who is. And what do we have to do as a body to be able to advance that conversation? And it may not be the government.
Yeah, and maybe just an additional insight to some of the subgroups. There was definitely this kind of chicken and egg conversation. Do we put forward first and go to the governor? Do we go to the governor first? And so it's, I think it's well set. There is that.
I gotta ask, we have a member of the governor's office on the board. What kind of feedback have we got from our office to that representative?
Well, unfortunately, that representative is in another meeting and isn't, I mean, she's here today, but is, had to step into another meeting. So,
Before this conversation, I think so.
yeah, she's been involved, in the, GRB, the governor's requested budget deeply because she has pretty, broad scope in her job between education, labor, and workforce. She's just sort of finished up on that, and you could probably saw, I think it's last week, the GRE came out. And I think got a hold of both Ann and I and said that she's intending to get more involved with us. So she's here, she's interested and has time to be engaged now, but unfortunately has a meeting that she had to pop into.
Well, but to give you somewhat of an answer from previous representatives from the governor, I think part of it goes back to the three constituencies or the three suggestions you had. I think from I don't know what this governor says, but Governor Brown.
Right.
And Governor Brown, but the feeling seemed to me, and I can be wrong, the feeling seemed to me the governor didn't want to get head and to say what's what, right? So the governor is like, work it out, tell me what you want, and then I can help that happen. Don't tell me to tell you what to do. But then in order to work it out amongst yourselves, who is yourselves and whose interests rises to the top, right? So that's seems to be the sticking point is those three, and you articulated, I forget, you said like some people say the heck, WTB shouldn't get taxed, some say they should say that, some say they should do below reports. I think those, and so is that triumphant that have to come to some agreement about what going forward looks like. And previously under Governor Brown, I think the desire was for that to happen and then rise that up and say this is what we want. And then the government can say, okay, this is what we'll do. As opposed to the governor, as opposed to each of us lobbying the governor and then the governor taking it. You see what I'm saying? That's the way
So, does that happen when the WTDD is under the head?
I think it's tricky.
And, you know, it's work for the heck. Let's just call it out. It's yeah, I know you're not Governor Brown, just don't do that, but that's the place we are. And so without the governor actually saying the Workforce Talent Development Board is gonna not be under the authority of that, there's in reality no way that's gonna happen. I want to give David, he's been very patient. David, I got his hand up a couple times.
No, that's fine. I think it's related. I have two themes, one of which I think is the more technical one that I was lost in such and goes. The part of what we're talking about is gaining engagement with the legislature of the governor's office. And I do have some concerns, which I appreciate people listening to, that the report that we're going to turn in doesn't directly answer all of the things that the legislature told us in the report to answer. And I think that's going to make it harder for us to gain credibility if we're saying we want, for instance, I agree with these recommendations. You know, we need to be consistent performance metrics so that we can all be focused on these identified important metrics and report on them. The legislature told us some things that they expect us to report back. And I think we have some really good insights into some of them, but we don't go into all of it. We don't talk about the services, and I frankly think that makes it harder for us when we have these discussions, trying to be persuasive and that the collective feedback is just giving if we haven't been fully responsive, even if part of the response is, well, here's what you asked for, and by the way, here's the more important stuff. And to that latter part, to the more important stuff, I do think that these are important. I think the parts that didn't get enough focus, in my opinion, compared to the statutory requirements around evaluating programs and services is still key. Just kind of to your point about, are we doing what we need to do with the resources that we have? That's evaluating programs and services. And I don't think that that is fully reflected the way I read the statutory requirements. The other thing from this discussion, the talk about taking bold action, looking at restructuring, everything that I've heard, I agree with. It's really chaotic. Kim knows when I used to only do unemployment insurance, I used to, for all the headaches that I had, I thought, well, at least I don't have to figure out how all those different parts of the workforce system fit together. And I don't get it. But the recommendation in the formal report is to reorganize the state level NEOA program funding structures, which I think absolutely needs to be part of it. The question about where the WTDD is, the problem of having to navigate, you know, multiple different state agencies without it being easier to do. But some of the other examples come up when you were talking about the tension between, well, the state board gets to do it versus the local boards. And I don't see that level being reflected here. And if we're going to do a role disruption, say here, the system needs to work as a whole. I think it needs to include all parts of the system. And that if we just focus on the state agency level, we'll address one piece of it without necessarily addressing how all of the pieces work together.
I wonder, I think the second half of what, David said, good, but I don't think it's necessarily, it's going to solve for today. I think it's going to solve for. First part, I'm a little worried, is like, do not do what we were supposed to do thoroughly. And I wonder if there's a way to augment the report to include that in there, so that it's thorough. So I think it's important what he said, and if we missed it, we should probably check it in.
So there is a link in the report to the program evaluation reports that are currently already being done, that are referenced in the report. So, I think, David, you had seen that and you felt that that was satisfactory. Yep, in a side conversation we had had.
I think it's kind of that realistically with today being the 13th.
Yeah.
And even when we were talking about it earlier, I think realistically that's all that can be done. I do still worry that what I talked about in terms of credibility and how that's received, that I don't know if it will work.
I mean, I think one thing to keep in mind, I had the privilege of serving both on the initial assessments and the governance assessment. And so, you know, the initial assessment, when we did a very thorough engagement with the customers, job seekers and employers, that formulated the recommendations that went into the initial assessment. When we were talking about this assessment, we said, has there been progress? If we went back out and engaged those constituents, would they be able to say progress has been made? And would they, you know, it's like, if somebody tells you, well, I want you to do X, and then you don't do X, and you go back and you say, well, tell us what you want us to do. And they'll say, well, we told you to do X, right? So there was some sense from, you know, the planning group of, you know, a broader engagement with a broader set of constituencies would not tell us anything different than what we heard in the initial assessment. And given the limited progress on improvements to the limited assessment, was it going to be an exercise in frustration for the customers? And I can tell you from sitting in on the interviews and the focus groups, people are frustrated. So I don't know if that needs to be explained further or is helpful additional context for this, but so, excuse me?
That gives me some comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, just with respect, the fact that we have as a board and as a state engaged many stakeholders of the system in a variety of ways, but the most recent engagement we're reaching out. But the fact of the matter is WTDB is authorized by DOLA and has a role next to the government. And that question does exist. And that question does not, it should not have to depend on anything. It's not really exist outside of anything else, but it has its own imperative to be answered. And I feel like we have a repository of information from state boards, individuals, focus groups, people who have given their thoughts about the system, and yet we still haven't answered a critical issue about what it would mean to reorganize this board and how it's related, its legislative relationship with the government. Like we have an actual imperative. And so I think focusing on that is just separate from, because otherwise we're just snake eating its tail. We just keep on circles. It's just, oh, okay, what did so-and-so say? What did so-and-so say? What did so-and-so say? You know, just over and over. And am I? It's an Ouroboros. 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 Yes, they're
Sneaky is here. Great conversation. This is exactly what we wanted to happen during this. Again, I've had the privilege of being both the initial assessment and governance assessment. This is the first time I feel like coming here and presenting it. There's been this kind of robust dialogue and conversation around the report. So I want to just thank you for engaging in it. We have some more, I think we have some more time. And what time did you want to call the vote? Assuming
I
it's
want to
four.
call the vote at 5:03.
So we have some more time for some dialogue discussion. And if there's more questions or if anyone wants to answer or ask these questions up here. Yes.
I'm having a hard time, I guess I understand the problems. Complex administrative structure. Getting the ability to execute. Yes. So what I'm trying to visualize is how, maybe I've missed it in the report. It's a Venn diagram, all these organizations are overlapping, how they are in a schematic showing structurally how they're put together now, implementing, demonstrating that, then the structure you would want to go to the real simple format. And or may not so simple, because I don't have the agency to talk about it. But I'm just having a hard time seeing that would help me understand. Here's the problem, here's how they're overlapping, here's the data that we into them, here's where the disconnects are happening, here's the schematic event diagram showing where we're going.
Yeah, I think maybe one resource for you right now might be the appendix in the governance assessment. So the governance assessment is linked in this report. The appendix of the governance assessment has clear detail around the different agencies involved, the funding streams, how they believe they're, from like who sets strategy, who makes this kind of, that's just that'll provide you with the information around how the system works today. It's not getting to your, let's dissect that system and let's put the pinch points on it and what might that ideal future state be, right?
Yeah, but as far as the alignment, you don't see that across necessarily something that you could go through in order to get to the final idealized state.
Yeah, I think that you would. I think the first recommendation is get those roles and responsibilities clear, right? And you can use that information in the governance assessment as a foundation for that or as a starting point. It's probably not going to answer everything.
From the governance assessment, my recollection is that was really focused, again, just on the state level, but when we're trying to get the entire system aligned.
That's correct. It did not have, it didn't have the local workforce points. You are correct. So that would be a missing piece. The governance assessment. The appendix in the governance assessment, the local workforce, how the local workforce boards kind of, they're part of the system, but there wasn't as big of a deep dive in that. Yes.
So if we approve the report, then the next steps are laid out in the appendix. There are recommendations and action steps with specific dates. We're saying, yes, we endorse this report and we endorse these recommendations.
That's correct. So the KIC met in subgroups.
Right.
Once they developed their full recommendations and they developed the detailed action plans and steps with timelines and owners. And that's in the appendix of this 2024 assessment. So if you approve this report, you are de facto approving those action plans, knowing that once they get into it, they may morph and evolve, but it was the best thinking up at this point of the right steps in the right. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. And then a related question, I'm just looking at the membership list, and first, we don't have any members of the legislature. We have plans to.
We have.
Yeah, you're right. So that's specific. Yeah, thank you for bringing that right up. We have one right there. The governor's office knows we're down 3. We're required to have an R&D above the House and the Senate. He's a House D. We have put the word out now for, I think, about a year, broadly asking for folks to make recommendations for legislators to step up. Senator Dembro, who's been a champion of the state workforce board and local boards in the entire system for years, is I think officially done at the end of this month. So technically, we're down 2, but I mean, practically we're down to 3. Sarah is aware of Sarah Foster, who I mentioned earlier, policy advisor, as for her help. I have been contacted by some legislators and chatted with them, just educating them, because I can do that, about what the Workforce Development Board does, which starts with. Dan Cat spoke with the legislator the other day, who I reached out to, because that legislator is interested in our work. So, yes, thanks for bringing that up. If any of you, by the way, little rabbit hole, have recommendations, thoughts about that, please, reach out to me.
But to clarify, they are not volunteer. They volunteer.
Yes, to my knowledge, that's how it. David, is that?
I'll have to go back to, I think it's either the governor or legislative leadership.
Well, it's the same, yes, it's the same interpretive process for the board, but it's not,
They're
it's
not
not like they come up and say, you got to do. But maybe. Hey,
I thought they volunteer.
You might be one.
What the water? That's.
We have a question online.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm looking for the actual report that you're looking for a vote on. You're talking about some action items in the appendices. I don't see any of that.
The WSO assessment is on our website. Would you like me to send you the link? Andy. Sorry, I realize you can't see that.
Yes, that'd be great. Sure.
Wonderful.
Andy
Thank you.
Friedman.
First one, when it comes from industry, you know that you cannot improve what you don't measure. The last one, feel like the challenges, the alignment priority between the board and, so for example, whatever we are working on, not be aligned with third top priorities today, which are housing. To get that alignment, we would have to give the governor's office a heads up that this is the problem that we're taking up. Then come. If you Sarah can help.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great call. It is actually one of the first or second line items in one of the action plans is connecting these recommendations to the governor's priorities, because I think in the subgroups of the KIC, they felt we can make a connection between these recommendations to the governor's priority. It's how you frame the story. So that was one of the first, it was either the first or second action step is like, let's make that connection clear for the governor and the governor's policy advisors so that they're not having to guess kind of how these system recommendations can further accelerate and support the governor's priorities. Don't know the detail of what that is, but that's an action step piece of work that has to happen.
And this is hard. So for example, if we just take STEM education and art, or the next but if our priorities are housing and childcare, how do you align?
That's right. Yeah. And so it's a good point. Don't know the outcome yet, but the action plan outlines it as a step that's important to try.
Comment, and I just have to say this because it keeps popping into my brain. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is up for reauthorization, maybe in the next couple of weeks. And the recommendations that Congress is looking at will dramatically shift the law. So if that happens, we will be forced as a system to really dig in and take a look at it in the state. So I don't want to use that as an excuse, but it just keeps kind of popping up. It's like, yeah, we're going to be doing all this and 25 things more because we're going to have to, because the recommended changes that the Senate is considering are pretty dramatic. So just keep that in the back.
Do you feel like the report and the recommendations position the local boards to then?
I think it positions the whole state, yeah. I mean, the funding, the funding is gonna be different. There are gonna be other requirements and limitations, frankly, right? I'm looking at David to add a little affirmation. So it would create, but it will create opportunity and it will also create disruption. So
It's been multiple times historically.
yes.
That doesn't come up for reauthorization. So,
Well, and if it's not, then we might have other issues to talk about.
Right, yes.
Well, is there any chance that that reorganization could go over to the new administration?
That's how I was.
Well, that's part of the reason they're trying to do it so quickly.
What we've heard is that there's a political push by people here deeply about it, to get reauthorization with this Congress, partially because of the fear that to reduce government expenditure at the federal level. They might say if it's not authorized, it's not gonna fund it.
It's not only that, there is actually a push of the new administration to privatize a significant portion of this work that has already started in red states, which would move in efficiencies, profiteers, really profiting off the poor to do this work. And so that is another very impressive if it isn't authorized. And the other thing in the conversation is that the action plan is the next step to actually dig into. So there's an opportunity to flesh out the answers to the residents' questions right in that process. And so I think you're safe in saying that this is the stepping stone piece, is the high level, and then in the action planning, we'll get to that more detail. So I think that answers the question. Yeah, that reorganization.
Fundamental question of the mission itself, vision was considered, we're looking at improvements. So what is our effectiveness right now in making recommendations, governor's office actually doing something about it?
And now we wanted to speak to the question.
I saw. So was that discussed?
Was,
Yes.
I mean, I think when, having been in the KIC meetings, I think the KIC felt very strongly that this report needed to be different than previous reports. And so I think that they were very conscious and mindful of trying to have this report be a driver of change in a way differently than it had been.
So we are covering that element, that how it can be more effective. And is it on the governor's office side or our side or both?
I think that if I don't have the action plan memorized in my head, but the action plan about engaging the governor's office was really looking at how can we engage the governor's office differently to make sure that, either there's empowerment or, what's the other word? Either the system's empowered to move forward or there's a clear mandate. And then there have been conversations around what do we do from the time, assuming that the WTEB is going to approve the report, what's the right structure to get it from on the desk to conversations to support to kind of getting more support and energy and momentum behind the report. Hope that answers your question. I think we are just about 1 minute before time to vote. So I think I will step back if that's okay. I want to thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to be part of the conversation and again to serve you this time in helping develop the assessment. So thank you.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? Anyone abstain?
Yeah, one abstention.
David's abstained, and
like somebody else.
Can you repeat your name?
Josh Hall.
Josh Hall.
Any other discussions? All right, co-chair, congratulations. You can watch Governor. On the board with describe in the second dinner. I'm sure back today.
Yeah.
One of the biggest important thing today for the work that this was and it's that they're not. On that, think on commitment. Okay, next time is the first, you are going to be talking to the time and about partners and earlier we were talking about data and not share that by the so any changes are moving with not yet.
Can you hear us?
Hello? Barely. Hi, I'm sorry. The audio is really choppy. I'm getting about every, I don't know, 10th or 15th word. Am I coming through okay?
You are coming through okay. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, now we
That's
can.
better.
Yeah.
Okay, that's much better than it was. Thank you. Okay.
Are we able to turn it up in the room? It's this speaker and the one in the middle. Did they disconnect from each other? And then Kurt, you can go ahead and share your screen for your slides.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can you turn your mic and your computer up at all?
There. So, can folks see that?
We're good?
And, and can you still hear me? Okay, the audio is still a bit choppy. Okay. Sorry. Okie dokie. Thank you. Thank you all. Sorry about the technical difficulties that we had. My name is Kurt Tackman. I'm a Deputy Director of the Office of Workforce Investments at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA Title I programs and performance are part of my portfolio. This past September, we completed a process called performance negotiations, and I was invited here today to give an overview of that process and how it relates to the performance outcomes of some of our federally funded programs. So we'll be taking kind of a 30,000-foot look at the federal performance indicators, the process, including the negotiations that result in the targets for those indicators, and some of the related resources. I'm really happy to be sharing this information today because I think it's great timing. We've heard a lot so far about accountability, continuous improvement and alignment, including aligning various ongoing efforts. And with all of the in-depth work that's been done towards the WTDB strategic plan, the KIC assessment, and the development of a unified scorecard, I'm hoping our performance-related efforts can inform and support some of that work with the goal of a more comprehensive, unified approach that will allow local and state level partners to track successes and manage challenges and opportunities. Excuse me. Oops, sorry. Of course, I made an objective slide, mostly to provide framing and context for the information I'll be presenting, but also to kind of help me keep me on track so I don't get too. I'm sorry?
We're really having you.
Give us 1 second to figure out the technical side of things. I think one of our speakers went out.
Okay. Just let me know when it's good.
Way to connect it back to the other out. It doesn't look like it's on. Is it still plugged in?
Yep.
Jet, that's school district property right there.
I think what happened for friends online, we have two microphones in here and I think one of them disconnected. And so I could hear you. The rest of our audience can't hear you yet.
Are these two talking about Bluetooth?
I think they should be.
We're gonna push you to our next meeting. It's just too hard to hear you. Today.
Can you hear them, Kurt?
It's still a little choppy. I can hear you very well, Lilia.
Since we're having technical difficulties, we're thinking about pushing you to our next meeting because they would really like to hear what you have to say, but our speakers are not talking to each other, and so they can't hear you.
Okay, that's unfortunate. I'm happy to come anytime and present if today doesn't work. And I would say that folks have the materials, so it can be kind of a primer between now and then to kind of prepare.
I apologize, Kurt. Yes, the materials are available online if you guys want to review.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good luck with the rest of the meeting. Thanks.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about some of our category of research projects. We have an update on the forestry workforce study. I'd like to welcome Craig Pope and Andrew Dyke. Craig's going to provide some opening remarks from process to Andrew with Echo Northwest will give an update on the research. And they're both online, so we can't hear them. So, we'll have to do that.
Okay. Craig, are you there?
Are we presenting in person?
We're a little early, so.
Oh, there you
go. There's Andrew.
Yeah, and I talked, I'm not sure if I didn't see him online. I talked to Craig and yesterday he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to make it. So I'm happy to proceed if he's not otherwise around. And I don't know if you can hear me. I realized there were some technical difficulties.
Oh, by the way, I just told Ian, I'm going to ask Kurt, he's still on there, so maybe he'll hear this. I'm going to ask Kurt if he can just video his presentation with the slides, and then I'll send it out to you.
Okay, go ahead and take it away, Andrew.
I'll give that a try.
That's not what you want to look at. There we go. Okay, yeah, so, and please stop me if you can't hear, and, we'll take whatever approach necessary, but just really quick overview of the study. We got underway maybe 6 weeks ago. I have some dates on the slides. Don't have a lot of results to show, so I was just going to run sort of quickly through what we're hoping to do with the study, tell you where we are, and then happy to answer any questions. So wanted to start with what we see as the key sort of research questions for the forestry workforce study, and I'll just sort of walk through these. First one, what businesses, nonprofit organizations, et cetera, compose the forestry sector? And this is pretty standard for these workforce assessments. We want to get a sense of, what does the industry or the sector look like? What are its components? But I think this particular question is relatively more important for this forestry study. Oh.
I'm so sorry. We can only see the portion of your screen that says you are sharing your screen.
Oh, that's not very useful. Let me try one more time here.
No problem. Thank you.
I should have learned by now, because I had exactly the same problem a few weeks ago with a similar group. Okay, can you see this now?
Yeah.
Great.
We got it.
Yep. Okay. So I was on the first research question, and again, just sort of describing the sector, I think, is relatively more important for this study than for some other workforce assessments we've been involved in. The employment department's done some good work characterizing industry. Others have as well, but there's a sense that we've gotten from the steering committee and from others that the industry itself and the state has not done a great job of sort of fully describing the forestry sector and the various components. And so we'll put some emphasis there just in terms of describing, it's not just logs, it's not just fire prevention, et cetera. There's a lot more to it. And so that descriptive component is going to be relatively more important, I think. We'll be looking at the occupational and socioeconomic characteristics of the workforce, with the emphasis on the specific occupations, skills necessary to enter and progress through the occupations, the credentials that are relevant to the various components of the industry. And as I'm sure most of you, or all of you are aware, there are a lot of different kinds of activities that are related to the forestry sector. And so we'll be describing those and the characteristics of the associated workforce. We'll be putting a finer point on that and looking at the alignment between the current and anticipated future workforce needs, as well as the capacity in the relevant training programs, whether they're at the high school level, career technical education, post-secondary programs in a lot of different domains, trying to understand what's out there now, and through some engagement with interested parties, understand what's working, what's not working, what is the capacity, and then looking out into the future, into that anticipated workforce need, to think about how the systems might need to improve or expand to meet that anticipated need and address identified barriers. We're hoping through some data requests to be looking at not just the programs, but also ideally some of the labor market outcomes of program completers through some data we're going to request from the state, and look at the demographic characteristics of people who enter the program, who ultimately complete, and think about the implications for the diversity of the workforce. And then I mentioned high school, looking at the role that dual credit currently plays with respect to the industry and the additional role it might play. And I think we've seen, for as long as we've been doing these kinds of studies, having individuals, students, even understand that there's an industry out there, that there's a forest sector to work in, is important to introduce those kinds of things as early as possible to get people interested in the potentially good pathways into and through the industry. Throughout all this, we'll be emphasizing both barriers and opportunities, whether there are barriers to accessing training programs, barriers to accessing certain jobs because of geography or characteristics of people's communities, whether it's housing affordability, childcare, et cetera, and trying to characterize those as best as we can, and identifying opportunities to address those, those potential barriers and scale up things that are working really well across the state in our reporting. And then finally, again, related to that first question, we'll spend some time talking about the community benefits of the forestry sector generally, again, in the interest of providing a perhaps sort of more detailed and nuanced description of the sector than is currently available. In terms of the work plan, a couple of arrows showing where we are now. I'll just sort of run through this. We kicked off the project in very late October, I believe. Since then, we've been working on a forestry sector definition in terms of which sort of classically defined subsectors, sub-industries are components of the forestry sector. We've talked recently with the Oregon Employment Department about how they have characterized employment in the sector. We've talked to some other industry groups, such as the Oregon Forestry Resources Institute and Associated Oregon Loggers, to talk about their perspectives on the industry. So we're working on a quantitative description of the results of all of that, which will be ready soon. We started the initial engagement. Talked to some industry groups. We started talking to individuals, whether on the sort of post-secondary side, the research side, but also in the industry itself, to start to help guide the project through to the end, identify areas of focus, and again, things that particular workforce challenges that employers are facing, training challenges that individuals and employers are facing, etc. We will be in early next year, we'll be moving into the quantitative workforce analysis. That's sort of describing what's out there, what we expect to see in the future in terms of occupation, skills, credentials, etc. Task 6 is a program analysis where we're again looking at the training programs leading into and through the industry. We'll do another round of engagement to sort of test out potential recommendations as we move into the reporting phase, to make sure that what we're coming up with really resonates with the field. In terms of timeline, here we are in December. We have moved through the first few phases, and we're very close to having wrapped up our definition of the sector broadly. And again, as I've mentioned, we've started in on the initial engagement. You can see how the tasks are supposed to be flowing, with final report anticipated in June of next year. So there's what we've done. We had the kickoff October 24th. We submitted a more detailed work plan than was in our response to the RFP that has been approved, which included those research questions that I've mentioned. A little schedule here for the engagement. As I mentioned, we have started with the interviews. We're planning a couple of focus groups. They have not yet been scheduled, but ideally will occur late December to early January. I will have some initial results from that round of engagement in January, and then the second round of engagement starting fairly soon thereafter in February, but really focused on the latter end of that second period there, where we're again hoping to test our key findings to see how they resonate and potential recommendations. So again, sorry for the very quick overview, but that's sort of where things stand to date. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Andrew? And I had to step out, so I should for hit here. Questions, comments, questions? Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. I really appreciate your time and the efforts that you and your team at Echo Northwest are on to help this good body work so much.
Absolutely, thank you. And I caught most of that. The audio kind of faded out, but I appreciate your time, and we're available for any follow-up questions.
All right. Well, I'm going to move into our last piece on the agenda today, and we are about 11 minutes ahead of schedule. And this is around the Future Ready Oregon Employer Focus Group. A bit more context on Future Ready for the newer people in the room that may not know. It was a $200 million investment package administered by the HEC in consultation and collaboration and partnership with this very body, the Workforce Development Board, and it advances a more equitable workforce system and aims to increase opportunities for a diverse workforce through investments. It supports grants and strategies that Future Ready is centered on the education and employment needs of these historically underserved. It expands partnerships between communities, educators, and employers to advance innovation and talent development, similar to some of the stuff that this board does. Thirdly, connects businesses to diverse skilled workforce today and future forward. And lastly, it is intended to remove barriers to education and employment by connecting individuals to training and support that they need for good paying jobs and meaningful career. Here today to tell us about some of the work that's happened, particularly around the Future Ready Consortia, which there are 3, manufacturing, healthcare, and tech, is Jensen Strategies. We have Eric Jensen and Amelia Wallace to share about the employer focus group work that they've just not too long ago, to my understanding, complete. So welcome.
Thank you. So I'm going to just set some notes down here, and I'll stand and that's what I'll let her. Okay, it actually moves.
Yeah.
Good. Slides through. Okay, great. And I heard you had 11 extra minutes. That's 11 extra minutes that we've got, right? So yeah, so I am Eric Jensen. I am the principal and founder of Jensen Strategies, and I'm also the project manager for this particular project, doing the focus groups for Future Ready Oregon. And first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for letting us come and chat, share what we found. Please remember as we go through these slides that we are the messenger. One thing I'll say is I've got a number of slides. We have a lot of talk really fast, and I'll probably skip a slide or two. But my understanding is that you either have or will have a copy of PowerPoint. So you will have an opportunity to go back and look at some of the details that might be on those slides. The other thing is that there's a lot more detail. We are doing a final report. I'm assuming that you'll have an opportunity to see that final report as well. So on the next slide, sorry, just very quickly. Again, I'm Eric Jensen, and with me today is Amelia Wallace, our senior associate. Amelia and I were the team from Jensen Strategies that worked on these focus groups, and we both facilitated. Amelia, you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure, not so much. It's very nice to meet you all. Thank you all for having us today. As Eric mentioned, I had the opportunity to support him on this project. I actually led the manufacturing consortia focus group, so that was such a pleasure, and also had the opportunity to pitch it for Eric on a healthcare consortia focus group as well. So grateful to be here.
All right, and just a little bit about our firm. We are a management consulting firm. We specialize in public sector. So the majority of our clients are the state and local governments in Oregon. We do a number of things. I'm not going to go through those right now, but do them next. So the project objective. So what our objective was in doing these focus groups was to help inform the discussions that the 3 industry consortia were having. They wanted to hear from employers about the challenges and ideas that they had with regard to workforce issues, and particularly looking at planning and recruitment, training, development, and retention. So that was our objective. Moving on, just to tell you a little bit about the process. We held 15 in-person focus groups across the state, divided up between the 3 different industries. We went to 8 different regions in conducting those, and they were all in person. We also did a few one-on-one interviews where we didn't have enough people to chat with, but there were the 15 that we held in addition to those. So moving on, we had 75 employer representatives that participated in focus groups. It says 1 to 7. That is actually incorrect. We had between 1 and 10 per session. And
the 75 represented 67 different employers. The reason that number is different is sometimes we had more than one representative from the company. We also, in terms of the folks that participated, they generally were chief operating officers, CEOs, as well as HR-related folks, HR directors, recruitment staff, talent and acquisition leaders and professionals, and other people that knew about the workforce issues in their companies. Moving on. Oh, let's just skip this one. Okay. So in terms of the discussion parameters that we had for doing these focus groups, the consortia had come up with some foundational areas that they wanted us to kind of stick between. So that's demand planning, skills, credentials, education, training needs, equity and inclusion, and diversifying workforce. So that was the premise that we started with as we started to put together the questions for the focus group. So next one. So the areas that these are the areas that we were asking questions about. And we were asking about demand planning, we were asking about recruitment, about training and education, and about retention. Now, one of the things you'll note is that we didn't segment out diverse workforce. And there was a reason for that, because the life cycle of an employee is diverse workforce relates to all life cycles. And so we included questions about priority populations within the context of these others. Next one. We have the same organized agenda for each of the focus groups, and that's kind of what it looked like. We'll just keep going. So a little bit about the experience that we had in these focus groups. The participants in these groups were very appreciative of the opportunity to give their input. We heard it over and over again in focus groups, and they appreciated the in-person and the regional approach to this process. They were very participatory all the way through, and they were also thinking big picture. They weren't thinking about what can the state do for us. They were thinking about this is a collective issue, and we all need to partner together in order to be able to address these workforce issues. And finally, they wanted to also make sure that they were continuing to be involved. They were enthused by the focus groups, so they wanted to stay connected. Next. So very quickly on some of the focus group findings that we had, and again, I'm taking this high level of things that apply to all of the industries. We do have a breakdown by industry as well. So next slide. So first of all, one of the things that these employers made clear to us is that they were operating in some new circumstances when it came to workforce development and workforce retention. And one was COVID-19. COVID-19 turned, and I know I'm not saying anything new to you folks, but COVID-19 turned everything else. And now a lot of the employers are recovering from that and kind of doing a reset on their approach in terms of things like recruitment and development and how they're filling positions. But the other thing that changed that they noted was over the last several years, there has been a real shift in workforce expectations, workforce values, workforce needs. No longer are we talking about, what's the salary and what are the benefits, but we're also looking at what is the workplace environment like and what needs are you for. Next. So in terms of demand planning, one of the things we found, we asked people, how far out are you projecting? How far out are you going? And they would say, oh, a year at most. Nobody was really projecting very far out unless they were talking about things like capital. So that was interesting. The other thing we learned is they're using a wide variety. There's a chart that you'll be here that you can look at later, showing the different types of data and organizations that they go to for that data. But they also mentioned that they pay particular attention to government regulations and government policy and how that affects their industry. So for example, with healthcare, nursing ratios were often brought into that. Okay, next one. And here's the matrix that you can look at later. Next one. Recruitment. So their approach to recruitment has changed. It's changed from being passive, putting out the advertisement, seeing what comes in, putting a fishing hook out there and just waiting on the sidelines, and moving to a proactive approach. Because the workforce market is so competitive right now, they can't sit on the laurels. They also recognize that they need to start thinking longer term about developing their workforce. And so they're looking at new generations, folks that are in secondary education or even elementary education, to be able to start generating some interest in their industries. Next. They recognize because of the competitive job market, they have to be attractive. They have to be an attractive employer. And so their reputation has become more and more important to them of how attractive they are to the workforce. They also offer they're offering a more creative and competitive incentives beyond just salary and benefits, but they're also looking at monetary and non-monetary things, including meeting the needs of some of the personal needs of some of the employees, as well as looking at some of their workplace preferences of being able to work remote or be able to flex hours. That's next. We're going to skip the matrices. There we go. Thank you. Then with regard to education and training, they talk, every single focus group talked about this. Soft skills. There is a dearth of soft skills in the workforce that's entering the market, and even some that are in the market currently that have been in the market and have people with experience. And that was a big issue and finding for them is we're trying to find people that have the soft skills. And we'll talk more about that. Higher education curriculum being in alignment. They talked about this. It was different for each industry as to what it was that was out of alignment for them with higher education. But they were seeing that the technical training that they were getting was not exactly what they needed. Oregon higher education programs varying in availability and capacity. And there's limited access for geographic and financial factors. So what we're talking about here is they're saying there are constraints to access to higher education that are geographic and that they're financial. And so that's something that they're experiencing. And then also early and secondary education programs, they're finding those are helpful. Things like STEM are helpful, but they need to be strengthened and expanded there. Okay. I'm not going to go to the Gatsby challenge, but I've covered already. Oh, no, sorry. Go back. I'm going down the bottom here. The important want to engage more with higher education. And this is something that they're saying they really want, but they're also saying, boy, we don't have time. Moving on. Career pathways, we asked them about career pathways. Pretty much everybody said, yeah, career pathways aren't clear enough across the board. And the consequence of that is that you see people who are being self-selected, those that have the ability to step forward. And that particularly hurts on the priority population side of the equation. And particularly for non-degree path roles, the career path is definitely not clear. They also talked about how the situation is, and I mentioned this, is hurting priority populations in particular in terms of those opportunities. And that goes back to the geographic and the finance that I brought up earlier. Next. So in terms of retention, a few points. One is they're shifting the way that they do retention now. They're shifting to creating that work that people want to be in and to have those flexible hours. That's the thing.
and listen to people's problems. And they come in and they realize, oh no, we're dealing with addiction crises. We're dealing with people with acute mental illness crises. And they don't know that until they get there. And so the point that they were making is they think it's really important for people to get that job exposure early, so that they know what they're getting into, and it also gives them a little bit of a heads up too coming into the workforce. Number 5, incorporating soft skills development in all education levels. Brought that up earlier. They say this is a issue that spans all education levels, K through post-secondary, and that what needs to happen in the educational system is that soft skills development needs to be incorporated at all of those levels. All right, next one. Working with higher education to define and communicate career pathways for students. They mentioned that they did not have clear career pathways as a rule in their industries, at least for their entry level and the folks that were in their system. And so they want to
work with higher ed to define those career pathways and to communicate those to students and to others that is done in a consistent manner. Number 7, using local associations to help promote education, educate potential workforce on industry and career jobs. So this one, they were saying there's a great opportunity here for our industry associations to help us by promoting our industry and promoting careers in our industry, and they would like to see that happen. And then 8, identifying or establishing a clearinghouse or connect organization for job sharing between employers. This was said in the context of, look, you know, every once in a while we've got downturn, laying people off. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do a job share with another company so that we don't have to lay the person off? And they mentioned, one focus group mentioned WorkSource Oregon as a potential organization to take that on. But they would like to see some sort of clearinghouse for that. Next. So number 9, conduct and share research on key workforce trends, issues, and needs to help employers be more competitive and data-driven. In addition to the repository that we were talking before, they're saying it'd be nice to go a little deeper into the workforce issues and start looking at those, at some of the trends. And yes.
We have a question online. It's been sitting there for a minute. Josh, I don't know if more waiting for questions at the end.
If we can pull to the end, that would be great.
Okay, Josh, get to you in a bit.
Thank you very much. So, but they said that there could be more research done on, you know, what is attracting employees to organizations? What are some of the trends of people coming out of higher ed and making it into their industry? That sort of thing, they thought would be helpful. Number 10, provide resources and training to support priority populations and others' ability to access the tools and knowledge needed to navigate their education pathways and enter the workplace. So this came up in the context of there are people out there who don't naturally know how to get information or how to manage their life in a way to get through post-secondary education and get into the workforce. So knowing how to manage their own personal finances, knowing how to find financing for their education, things like that, or just having the technical skills of knowing the Microsoft software programs that are commonly used. Those types of things, they say it would be helpful to provide training, and this would be particularly helpful with priority populations, but others as well. So, and then provide education resources for employer leadership and staff to help them foster culturally competent workplace environments and enable priority populations to be successful. So what does that mean? Employers, when they talk sometimes about diverse workforce, they talk about can we recruit diverse workforce? This is on the other side of the equation. Once you get them in the door, do you have the organization that is culturally aware to be able to have these folks feel inclusive and be able to function within your organization? And so being able to have a leadership team savvy to that and also preparing their organization is really important in terms of the priority population, because in a lot of cases you see people being brought in, but then they leave within a year. So next. So number 12, evaluate opportunities. This is under the policy category. And by the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning, we divided these up into 3 different categories: programmatic, policy, and funding. So, and there is crossover between them. We put them in the place we thought they had the most impetus. So, evaluating the opportunities for establishing professional licensing and credential reciprocity agreements with other states. Oregon does not have reciprocity agreements in healthcare, but also in other in other licensing, like with electricians. And so what they're saying is it would really help us a lot if there were some type of reciprocity agreement or something similar that would help us to bring out-of-state candidates in and not get bogged down with the credentialing and get bogged down with the license. Number 13, fostering partnerships between the state and businesses to strategically market the industry. This came up in the context of talking about Oregon's reputation over the last 4 years and the perception by some that Oregon's reputation is hurting it's hurting the ability to attract people here. A lot of people mention Portland specifically, but nonetheless, they think there is a need for businesses in the state to work together to try and shift that and shift the perception and also make the industries here more attractive as employers in that context. Next. So number 14, providing tax breaks or other incentives for companies who provide training to entry-level employees. This is really talking about where some of these companies were feeling like higher education wasn't giving their employees the training that they needed coming in the door. And they're saying, if higher ed can't do that and we're going to pick that up, give us some incentive to pick that up. And for some of the technical competencies that are not being offered in higher education. And then lastly, providing employer incentives and or resources for the workplace, enhancements to attract and retain employees, particularly priority populations, putting in those incentives to have those types of benefits that will help priority populations, but your workforce in total. And things like childcare, housing assistance, benefits, DEI training. Those are the types of things that they gave examples. So, I don't know how I'm doing on time. All right. So we'll move to the next slide because I think the next slide says Q&A. All right.
I think John is up first.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have a question. I was just having a real hard time hearing there for a little while, so apologize about that.
Some of what's in here are things that this group has worked on over the years. So I'm just curious how you're thinking about as you big action steps for that, how you'll tap into that start group. There's other groups that worked on things. Or like, for example, we talk about research on trends. That stuff's already available, so I would hate to see like a whole body of work started on this research trend that make employers, useful to SHRM and download. So how do we ensure that the work that you're all needing isn't something that's already been done and you're sort of creating or being duplicative versus really getting after the action part of it?
This is something that we come across all the time in this kind of exercise, where we're getting opinions that we're sharing. As I said at the beginning, we're the messenger. We're just sharing what we heard. But what that tells you is that those folks don't know about it. And so that is probably the place that you want to start in terms of, okay, look, we need to get people to let them know these things exist.
I asked actually some slightly different questions.
I'm sorry.
Clear. Agree with you completely. What I'm not clear on is the work that you just talked about, is it going to be like an action plan created from it? And how does that action, how do we make sure those steps aren't things that already exist, that maybe to your point, just need amplifying or illuminating, that you can kind of join arms with other groups. So for example, like Charlie's focusing over there going, oh my gosh, we have curriculum. And we call it essential employability skills. Stop calling it soft skills because it's best employers call it soft skills, but we call it essential employability skills. There's a curriculum, there's all that stuff. So I'm just trying to make sure that behind this, all these items are really good, but there's work that's been done on that. So how do we just make sure somebody doesn't start over researching or creating a committee or whatever?
So, this is,
Can you hear me okay?
yes,
So sort of asked for this information to help guide where we need to take the work. I think your question is critical, which is if we have employers out there who don't know where to go get something.
Yeah.
Or it's out there, but it's in important places, but it's
Yeah.
not segregated.
Right.
What do we do about that?
Yeah.
And it's body of work.
Yeah, okay, so
Does that help?
Yeah. Very much so. Thank you.
thank you very much. Appreciate the clarification. Other questions?
I just also follow up on the next minute of the feeling that, the first one of the first things you introduced was they don't look more than a year in advance. And that's that all the time. So not only where to put that in the page, but how to make it so easily accessible and navigable. If that and follows up to what you said. I think there are a lot of resources in the previous role that I had, and the one I have now. It's like, how do you not know that? But it's not your fault.
All right, so, other questions?
I love the branding one. It's saying that for years, you have all thing about widespread this on the board.
Great. Well, if you don't have any other questions, I think we're done.
Thank you, Eric, very much.
Thank you.
In the home stretch, last item, any other business? Okay, any item for follow-up? I know we have Kurt is gonna do a little video presentation, so we'll hear about Kurt's work via video.
And if not for the staff, we'll get something put together to send out.
Okay, so more to come on that. Any other action items for follow-up? Okay. Anything else for the good of the order?
Thank you again to the school. That was really great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll send out, as a follow-up to this, when you meet, we're not together every single day. Sometimes we will guide all the stuff that we got done. So we're going to send out how things that we want to share with you all the things that we're proud of that this group accomplished over the last year. And Dad, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know you all are very busy scheduled and, it was part of time on Friday afternoon. Is really a testament to your commitment. So thank you so much for being part of this group.
And one last time, congratulations to Venkat. Thank you for all your work for the board and across the system. And to you, Mr. Hopewell, congratulations. Thank you for all your hard work.
Yes, meeting is.
Anybody still needs to do some holiday shopping, I have asked to the Columbia Gift Store, which has Mount Harper and Promise, and some take some.
March 2025, for Roy Nightingale, not this meeting. It'll be a tour of the night. Camp for.
Thanks.